All right, so another video, and this is actually going to be the first time where I'm answering a question that someone has written in about another video, and this was about the healing and suffering video, which a lot of people seem to really like. And someone asked a question about it, and I thought what I would do is read the question, and then I'll just see if I can kind of answer it to the best of my ability. In something like this, I want to take a little bit of notes, so I might refer to my screen here just to make sure I don't miss any important detail. So here's the comment/question that was written into me. I'll read it for you now, and then we'll comment on it. A core question for me has become, how can I play my part in the process of healing, being healed by God, bring my 1% of the effort without trying to make it happen all the time? My tendency is to grasp at the process, to try and force progress and healing. I don't want to use meditation like a crowbar. I am eager to dig down deep into the suffering, if it means progressing towards union with God. But when I don't perceive the fruit, but still feel the suffering, it can get hopeless. I start to doubt whether or not healing is really possible and available, or if I'm just trying to force another result. Anyway, that is a topic that I would like to see a video on possibly. Thanks again. Okay, so I'll try not to make this an hour-long video. We'll see if I could do that. So the first thing I want to say about this is, he asks about, he's eager to get in touch with the suffering, to dig down deep into it, if that means getting closer to God. But he doesn't want to use meditation like a crowbar. And I think that's great. I think that's the right idea. And I want to just say in general that our meditation, it has to have only one intent. At least only one primary intent. I mean, it's okay to have secondary concerns and things that we're hoping for, but our primary intent must be only to get closer to God. And even that, we can't have an opinion on how that has to look or how it's going to happen. So when we pray at first, before we meditate, the whole, and I've said this many times, but the intent has to be, God, I want to know you. I want to be close to you. I don't know the way. I don't know how that should look. And so your will be done in my life. Let me just quietly receive your healing and your power. And we have to create a vacuum in our lives to some extent for this to happen. And this is the hard part. This is the transition between not on the path to on the path. This is the first shift that I see people make. That's a real serious shift. And here's why it's a shift. Before the path, we were operating on our own will completely. We had motivations and desires and goals that we had set. And somehow through life, we came to see that those motivations and desires and goals were not fulfilling enough and that we wanted a deeper spiritual life. So we're operating in an egoic way, even if we're good people. It's not as if the only people that are egoic are bad people. Good people are egoic, and they're operating from egoic motives to some extent. And so everybody who starts the journey from here to being definitely on the contemplative path has to go through a funky period that's difficult or strange, where they begin to unhook from all of their built-in desires and motives and mood generation systems and mood avoidance systems and behaviors. There's all these things we're doing that are not working, that would never get us to union with God. Not in 1,000 years. And that all has to change. But we don't know what the change we're coming to is. We don't know what it looks like. And we don't even know what's wrong with how we're operating yet. So it's a very strange period. And so my first answer to this, this guy says he's eager to get in touch with suffering, if that means getting closer to God. But he doesn't want to use meditation like a crowbar. And this is really important because a lot of people come in so willful that they're so filled with will that they're really trying to force God's hand in every way. And without even meaning to, sincere, good people here. So what do you do with that? How do you get past that? The first thing I'd like to say about like an answer to this, a real answer, is that for the contemplative path to be a contemplative path, if we're going to walk a deep spiritual path, if we're going to do that for real, then regular daily meditation must be taking place. And it needs to be at least 20 minutes in the morning, and it needs to be at least 20 minutes in the afternoon or in the evening, like right before bed. And that would be the minimum. And further, though, the meditation can't be along certain veins. So visualizing white light coming into your body, filling yourself with God's love, focusing on joy, I'm going to have joy. Focusing on peace, I'm going to have peace. Focusing on love, I'm going to have love. Those kind of meditations won't work. And peace, joy, and love are the greatest attributes they're like the thing everyone's after in Christian spirituality. And they are the greatest powers. They're above prophecy, and they're above psychic ability, and they're above miracles of healing. Peace, joy, and love are great. They're great. But we don't know how to get to those. And we don't know what kinds of changes, fundamental, structural, deep changes must happen in our psyche in order to come to this love. We don't know. So when we come to meditation, we have to come empty. We have to come saying, I want to get closer to you, but I have no idea how that will look or feel. And so there has to be that genuine desire to get closer to God. But there also has to be a genuine surrender to having no idea how that should look. There should be no agenda whatsoever on how that's going to look. Either in that meditation period, right? Or in the 2 or 3 months following, beginning a regular, serious practice of meditation daily without ever missing. So in both areas, both in the immediate 20-minute period, I've known people who have quit because they started meditating and in 20 minutes, nothing happened. And you cannot get anywhere that way. It doesn't work like that. There's a certain segment of the population that will begin meditating and notice something right off the bat. That's fine, but it's a small percentage of people. Most people won't even really notice the shift that's happening yet. They won't see it. So the most important thing, the most important answer to this question is, there must be a serious meditation practice in place, and it must be consistent. We can't be missing our meditation at all. It's very important. And it must be concerted effort. It must be real effort. If you've chosen a sacred word to say over and over, Yahweh or God or whatever, it doesn't matter. But you've chosen this word, and there must be a concerted effort to really say that word and put all of one's attention on that word and rest. And say that word with all of one's attention and then rest. And say that word with all of one's attention and then rest. That must be a concerted, real effort where we're putting all of our will into it. And I say that because I've said many times on this channel, Christian meditation is will-based, not mind-based. But there's no such thing as a practice that isn't both. We're only talking about where is the emphasis. So, of course, the mind is involved. It has to focus on the sacred word. But the will is really where it's at. And so when someone sits down, they must genuinely want to put all their attention on God. Now, I don't mean they have to feel like they want to. They have to genuinely try. That's the will. So That's the first answer. And I don't know the person that wrote this, and I don't know if they meditate every day or they don't yet. I don't know. But I know that in my many years of being on this path, I've never, ever seen the change take place, ever, not in a single person. The change that I'm talking about, I have never seen it take place in anyone who wasn't meditating 20 minutes twice a day without fail. Now, I don't want to chase anyone away or scare anyone. I know you know God if you're not meditating 20 minutes twice a day. I know you do. Of course you know God. But we're talking about the contemplative path and how it unfolds into union with God. It flowers naturally and blooms and blossoms into union with God, a kind of enlightenment. And that doesn't happen. It can't happen without regular exposure to God's power. And a surrender, a loss of self. And I'm just going to refer to my notes just for a moment. That's the other. So we're talking now about regular meditation. This is an answer to the question, right? It's a long answer. Many aspects involved in answering this man's question. But, so okay, this person must meditate regularly, and here's why. He said, how can I avoid trying to take over or force it or make it happen? And I would say that without some distance from self, you can't. That's what I think. I think meditation is the cure for everything, for all of our problems. So here's the tight, bound up conglomeration of self-centered action and perception and being. This is what we think we are, and all of our strong opinions and knowing. We think we know everything, and whatever our sort of conglomeration that makes us us, that's here, okay? And what's beautiful about meditation is and all of this is held together by thought and emotion, by thinking and perceptions, and it's laid layer upon layer upon layer of perceptions about life and self and God and the world. And all of that is wrong. I mean, the whole thing is wrong, every bit of it. Are there facts that are true in here? Yes, sure. But the entire unit, the entire perception of life and personality that exists, it needs to be utterly unwound. And so deep meditation, it creates this because all of our attention goes on to God alone. God alone. And then the mind tries to distract us with its ramblings. And it doesn't really matter what they are, but it's always running them. And they're all part of the ego system, right? They're all part of the false identity. They're all part of sin. So the mind is just doing this all the time. But we say, oh, I come back. And then the mind is doing it and then come back. And after a while of really trying, I mean, not pushing it, but consistent, sincere effort daily, twice a day, the person will begin to drop into less active, less rigid, less solid false self. It all quiets down and they begin to sink down under it. And there's levels of this. And for many people, this is the first time they've ever been outside of what they think is them. Right? Like, this is what they think they are. This is their experience in life, at least, even if they don't think this is who I am. This is their sort of experience in life. And deep meditation, you really do start to get a distance from that. And at a certain level of depth, not that far in, you start to get tastes of not noticing any of that, where none of it is going on. It's just not happening. But you notice you're still there. But none of that is happening. None of it is going on. Okay, well so I know this sounds like you're not answering my question. That is the answer to how do I avoid turning the spiritual path into a crowbar and forcing it. That's the answer. Distance from self and the delight of experiencing distance from self, even if it's fleeting, even if when you come back out of meditation into regular life, even if you come right back into your egoic mind and you're a mess again, or you're whatever you are, driven, or whatever your thing is, that state, that egoic state that we exist in here, the people come in here, by contrast, it is suffering. And many people say they didn't notice how miserable they were until they went into deep meditation and came back. And the freedom of having none of that going on, and then coming back into and having it all come back, and boom, you're back in that same state. That's when you know you've been suffering your whole life, and you didn't even realize it. So I want to say that deep meditation is, first of all, the most important answer to this. And I can't stress it enough how the contemplative path will not unfold unless you're practicing contemplation. And so this practice has to be consistent and you never miss. Okay, so let me just read again. I want to make sure I don't miss anything for this person. And then meditation has to be neutral. I think I already kind of said that, but meditation must be neutral. We want God only, but we don't know how that feels and we don't know what it looks like. And so we can't go in saying, today I'm going to have God heal my depression, or today I'm going to get out of this meditation today a real chunk of the pain from my youth. I'm going to really get in touch with it today. I'm really going to focus on it and bring it up and feel it. And that's what this meditation is going to be about. That is wrong. That is wrong. It happens to us because we've given our will to God. And this is a hard one for people because they're in a hurry to see results. They come in with, a lot of times at least, people come in with motivations that, even if they don't know they have these motivations, they have specific motivations that they want to get out of spirituality. And God's not playing that game. God doesn't play that game with us at all. God doesn't do that. What it's going to be, it is going to be. And we have to wait long enough in surrender and in willingness to start to see that unfold. And here is where people do get off the path. Here's where people get lost. Here's where people get disheartened because they have all these aspirations of what it's going to be like, and they want to see it start to unfold. And it is. But they want to see, they're in the process where they're just still losing attachment to self enough to come to this crucible moment when they have lost it to some degree. Boom. And then this other change begins to unfold, like see an X over the screen, so much self, so much attachment to its own will, its own desires. Then slowly and slowly it becomes less attached. And then this moment happens when it starts to happen. And then a new world begins to open up. And people on this side of this process quit because they want this part to unfold, and it can't even unfold yet because they're so attached to self and so rigid and so structured. So there has to be a neutrality about it. There must be, I don't know the way. And so I want my suffering healed. Just an example, just drop in, right? So someone was abused as a child and they want their emotional wounds healed. Of course they want that healed, and it's not wrong to expect that out of the spiritual path. But when? to assume it should happen now is utterly wrong-headed, and it will never get anywhere. There may be many qualities this soul needs before that healing can take place. God may need to plant a growing stability in that person, some kind of solid underpinning on which to stand when the whole world of the psyche begins to rumble and shake and transform. So we have to stick with the path long enough to start to notice that it is happening before we ever noticed it was happening. One day you say, oh, it is happening. Things are changing. But they need to happen on their own. We don't create them. What we end up doing is cooperating with those changes as we see them naturally happening. But that is not an easy thing for people to do at first. I don't think it takes very long to get there. I'm not saying it takes years. This isn't years, okay? But it takes a while for a person to stop all the things they're doing to try to make it happen and all the expectations they have about how it's going to look. And busy. It takes a while for that to die away. And then it just starts to happen. And what we end up doing is cooperating with those changes as they happen, not creating them. So we don't wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to dig down deep into my suffering. We don't say that. We are open to that. But what we say is we get up in the morning and say, I am willing to go where God would take me. And we try to get as neutral as we can and quiet as we can in our will and in our mindset. Just try to quiet everything down and wait for that to unfold. And we don't wait for answers or visions or signs either. We just abide in that place of willingness. And if for a day all we noticed is that we just sort of were able to abide in that place of willingness, that is enough. That is it happening. So what I want to say is there's so many, God knows how to get you into union with God, right? And there's a lot involved in that we have no idea about until it unfolds. The order in which our healing has to take place, it must be God's order. It must be God's order. And as long as we're really revved up about it, it makes God's order very difficult to see or notice and participate in. So that's my first answer, regular meditation, and then a real practice of surrender. Not joy today, not depression today, not getting in touch with my suffering today, not active today. None of that. God, what do you want for today? And then a slowing down and a listening for that. A willingness to have that happen. If anything, we would just practice that like a neutral willingness where I just want God's will to happen, but I don't know what that is, so I'm only practicing just only wanting God's will and not trying to go after all what I think it ought to be. And that is, by the way, a kind of humility, isn't it? Because if we've found some humility, we know we don't know what it should look like. So then we stop trying to make it look like something because we know we don't know. Okay, let me just check again. Notes. Okay, just a quick mention, and I already said it, but I want to make sure I say it again. So generating moods for the day is not a good thing. So if you wake up in the morning, I doubt people on a contemplative path who are interested in a contemplative path do this, but some might. You don't wake up in the morning and look in the mirror and talk yourself into a good mood. You don't do that. You pray yourself into a place of genuine willingness to do and be whatever God would have you do and be. And it could be joy, but it could be love, but it could be peace, but it could be holy sorrow, it could be suffering. It could be surrender, it could be humility, it could be growing in wisdom. It could be growing in intuitive capacity. There are so many elements to union that to get up in the morning and assume we know which one to work on is extremely wrong-headed. And it will get nowhere on the contemplative path. All that has to quiet down. So we really are looking for a silence here. We're not generating moods. We're looking for a kind of vacuum. We're looking for a kind of emptiness where we're just saying, God, your will. On all levels, your will. What you would have me do is where I want to be. And if you have a life that requires certain activities, if you have kids, then, it doesn't matter how much we pray only God's will. You know you're going to get up in the morning and you're going to cook them breakfast and you're going to get them dressed and get them off to school or whatever that is. Like, we know that's what you're going to be doing physically, right? I mean, there's no doubt about that. It's not as if someone with kids says, okay, God, I give you my life, and God says, ditch the kids and go do this. Of course not. Never. That would never happen. Never. But still, if a person genuinely says, God, your will be done, show me the way, they're very different with the kids. Right? Things change. So this neutrality and this emptiness, knowing we don't know the way, that is sort of a foundational practice, something we try to carry through the day. I don't know the way. You still do your best every day. You just show up, right? You don't have to do any of this perfect, but a genuine willingness to only do God's will. That's the key. And that is a big chunk of, even at more advanced stages of spirituality, deepening this capacity to want to do God's will is a big part of the path. And returning to it, if you find yourself having wandered, returning to it and then feeling the cloud of power that often comes over a person when they surrender their will to God. Okay, so another quick look. Okay, so, all right, so now, regular meditation will create a vulnerability in your soul. So, we don't really dig for our suffering. We know it's there. Most people can go down and find pain if they look for it. And we don't do that. It is enough to become present with what is. We're neutral. We're not generating moods. We're not generating activities to avoid our moods. We just get present with God. We're listening for God in our body, in our heart, our mind. We're listening for God's presence. And because of this listening, and also mostly because of our deep meditation practice, we become more vulnerable to all of our suffering arising. And so then it's just a matter of, here I am, God, what would you have me do? Going about our day and allowing the day to unfold in the way that it does. And being triggered by life, having our suffering brought up by a loved one, a friend, a coworker, something being said that triggers shame, something being said that triggers our anger or our pride, right? So then there's pride. Pride arose. Now, you didn't dig that up. Life brought it up. Meditation made you more vulnerable to life bringing it up. And now you know what to look at. And now you know what to feel. And now you know what to be present with. And I'm going to have to do an entire video on self-examination, or self-knowledge. Christianity calls it self-knowledge. And it's a super important part of the path. It's almost as important as meditation, probably. And you can't get by without it. But let me give you like the short version of it. So the first step of the short version of it would be you would get triggered at work, or wake up having had a dream that stirred up things in you, or get triggered by a loved one, or anything that comes into your life that brings up your pain, your pride, your fear, your resentment, your anger. And you would, instead of seeing that as something to quickly put away and, hurry and fix by putting a Band-Aid over it, covering it up, putting board over it and nailing it down. This is now life and God giving you the gift of self-awareness. So you take the time. You're triggered already. So go into that and find out why. Find out what fears you have, right? Notice this and feel it. This is the first step of self-awareness. You feel these things arise and you notice them and you observe them with your mind and you label them when possible. This is fear, the 7 deadly sins. Look those up if you don't know them. This is fear. This is avarice. This is lust. This is wrath, right? This is my laziness, my slowness to respond to God's power. We notice when these things arise and we make room to really see them. We're allowed to be human. We're allowed to have problems and shortcomings. We don't feel ashamed that they are there, unless shame is one of our issues, and then we will feel shame. But we don't think for one moment that a human being who has suffering and pain inside of them has done something wrong. It does seem to be a part of being on this planet, that there is suffering, and that if you are raised by people on this planet, you will have it. So the first step is just that. Just don't try to fix it. Don't try to push it away. Don't try to dig it up. Just be with it. There it is. It just happened. That's perfect. That's when you do it, is when it happens. And then there's just a little, we must admit that these are our problems. And this is a huge part of it. The monk that told me about the garden of Adam and Eve. He said, "Do you know what the point of this story is?" And we know there's many points, but he said the point is, hey Adam, what happened? Eve made me do it. Hey Eve, what happened? The devil made me do it. And the monk told me that's the root of all sin right there. So you get triggered, and someone triggered you, and they may very well be wrong in their actions or words. They might very well be wrong. But you were triggered because you are filled with those things that their actions brought up. And we cannot ever get anywhere if we say that's them. They did it, it's their fault. And everyone does this. Some new people, when you're teaching them this, will say, right, I got it. And then they'll go on to complain about the person that triggered them. And we know those people are wrong often, but we have to touch that. We have to own it and say it's ours. And then we have to unhook our will from it. This is a real process. I hope you maybe even take notes because it's so important. Then we got to find out how our will doesn't genuinely want to let these things go. We don't genuinely want to let go of our anger. We want to stay angry at them. We don't want to forgive them. Sometimes we think forgiving them would mean it was okay what they did. That they got away with it. So we stay angry. We can't do this. We must not do this. We must come to a place where we are willing, genuinely willing to let it go, to let God remove it, to come to a new perception in life. And then the last stage is to genuinely, sincerely, honestly give God permission to come into our soul and heal all of this. and get us from point A to point B, which we cannot do ourselves. And that process, I would say, and I'll do a whole video on it, and I know I've mentioned it somewhere else in one of the videos, but that process is really, it's on par with meditation. It is required. The path cannot unfold without it. So try to hear that. You cannot sweep this stuff away. It's not enough to say, you made me angry. Even if they did, even if what they did was wrong. But we still have to go in and say, what in me is in disorder that allowed me to be resentful, lustful, afraid, judgmental, prideful? What is in there, right? How did I get to this place? What thoughts about life do I hold that have gotten me here? What emotional wounds do I have that make me vulnerable to this? This is a big part of the path. Okay, and let me just read again really quick. Okay, so that's really the whole thing. The only other thing I want to say is that this really happens to people. So we're not talking about like fancy things. I read a lot of really fancy stuff when I got on the path, and I'm not a fan of it anymore. Not after 25 years of the grind, of authentic spirituality, grinding away at you. And so what I want to say is, this is going to look messy and real when it happens. And I don't know everyone who's listening, obviously, but so don't hear this like you really have to, this is true about you for sure. I don't mean that. Everyone's different. But most people, when God triggers them and brings up their suffering, they're absolutely going to think they're doing it wrong and that something is wrong when it comes up. And this is because when it comes up, it really comes up, and you enter that state of mind, that fallen state of mind. And I know I've spoken about this in the suffering video, probably. You enter your fallen state of mind. And so you're going to be discouraged if discouragement is one of your issues. You're not going to outgrow discouragement by never getting discouraged. It's not going to happen like that at all. If part of your thing is to become listless and want to give up or be a victim of it, I used to really do the victim thing a lot. Everything's poor me. If that's what you do, you're not going to stop doing that as you get over it. In fact, it's going to come again and again. It's going to cycle. And so, unfortunately, and this is why community is so important, and a spiritual director. I can't stress enough how powerful it is to check in with somebody once a week, once a month, and bring all of just the brokenness to them. I know I've said all of this. I might be repeating my suffering video a little bit, but I can't stress enough. If I go see the monk, here's what we're not doing. We're not celebrating how on fire Clinton is. Like, that's not what we're doing. What I'm doing is taking all the brokenness, all of the wrong-headedness, all the confusions to him. And he's giving me clarity and feedback about that. This isn't the Clinton is great show with him, right? And so you're almost certainly going to feel discouraged, disheartened, disillusioned on this path. You are. There's no way around it. I don't believe in a path where people say that never happens to them. I don't believe it. I mean, I do a little. I believe that one in a billion people is just naturally so awake that they don't have that deep work to do. I certainly believe in that. But I don't I don't believe it's likely, walking around in Salt Lake City, that I will ever meet one of those people in my whole life that I live here. I don't believe I'll come across even one. It's that rare. So we can't allow ourselves to view the path as if we're doing something wrong just because we became discouraged or disheartened or listless and afraid. Those things are going to arise because they're already inside of you. They're already there. And your will is choosing them. You have made friends with that in your will, and you have chosen. Some of it was thrust upon you before you had a choice, obviously. But even then, there's these choices we make to agree. And so when that kind of thing arises, it is an opportunity to see it again with clarity, to own it, to find out what sins, right? Pride and anger and fear and jealousy and all those things, what is built into that view? What is built into that suffering? How have I chosen it? Maybe I could even notice where I made my first decision to be that way. Right? Maybe I can notice that. And we have to come to a place where in our will, we can say, I no longer choose that. And it is not going to go away when you say that. It's not. Don't think you've done something wrong if you say, okay, I no longer choose this, and shame just still keeps kicking right on for that whole half hour of you sitting there being sincere with God. Don't for a moment think that you must see or should expect it to shift in that moment. It's not like that. I mean, it could be that way, but it is so unlikely. What's more likely is it keeps ticking on because it now has been fed for so long. It has a sort of life energy of its own. But the will, when the will says, I really no longer choose you, you cut that off from it having power. You're now no longer feeding that jealousy. You're now no longer feeding that resentment. You're now no longer feeding that self-pity. So you're experiencing it still because it's already there. But you're not feeding it. So every time these things reoccur, if you can unhook your will from it and really go into prayer and say, God, I really give you this. I don't want this anymore. Completely willing to be different. If you can say that, you will. It will happen. It will happen. But it won't happen in your time frame. And one of the analogies I like is a Rubik's Cube, and I think I used it already in the other video. You can't expect for your life not to look messy while God is rearranging you. The discouragement, in my opinion, the best solution for becoming discouraged is a spiritual director or a spiritual community that you are part of. You know, you go to work, sometimes you're married to someone who's not doing this. Sometimes your extended family isn't doing anything like this. And they're doing other things. They're getting up and putting a board over the top of that hole and nailing it shut and saying, no, not today. I won't deal with you. I'm going to go on and do well. And that's fine, but that's not the path we're on. So you're not going to get the average person at work or at the bar or at the sewing club. They're not going to be people you can share this with and who will then support your attempts to walk the contemplative road. So, of course, you're going to get discouraged. You need a community. You need a spiritual community. You need people to be around that you get to know who are doing the same things. And, and you watch them for a few years and you say, this version of them is much better than 3 years ago. But then there's proof to you that it's happening. And if you stay on the path long enough, you'll look back, and see, I'm happier than I was last year. For sure, I'm better off than I was last year. And that, for me, that's where all the hope of the path comes from. I want union with God. I really want to go all the way into union with God. I'd like to get into union with God before I die. And I'd like to even help other people get into union with God. But my ego doesn't need that now. It's okay if that didn't happen to me. I'm okay. My peace and contentment in life comes because, for sure, not in my imagination, not in any way that I have to sort of talk myself into. I can look back at my year before, and I always think I'm so glad I am not that way anymore. I always think I am glad I am not the way I was last year. And everyone I know on the path can do this. And so it's in retrospect, you've been changed by God. And you know it because you look back and say, wow, that was a kind of suffering I'm not experiencing now. And then only one little caveat I want to say is, Jesus promises some suffering. He promises pruning from God. If God loves you, God prunes you. And so you are going to enter periods of disorder. And this is going to sound like I'm contradicting what I just said, but I could name 3 people right now who I know are more aware of their disorder, more on the line with it, more in touch with it, and even who might say God is to some degree thrusting it upon them to get them to deal with it. So they're more aware of all of that suffering than they were 2 years ago, and they can still say they're better off than they were 2 years ago. So it's not really a paradox, but there is this part of the journey where some seasons come along and a storm that was blowing in your heart and soul, that was always blowing, but you kind of fell asleep to it. You didn't notice it anymore. A dull ache, right? Or a numbness was down in there. And then life triggers you, a failing relationship triggers you, right? A job, a career opportunity loss triggers you, or a success triggers you, and you're all of a sudden you're in water that's deeper than you can handle, and all these insecurities arise. Life will thrust this upon you. The spiritual path will thrust it upon you, and the Holy Spirit will make use of all that and directly initiate these upheavals in you. And so you can look worse while you're getting better. That's just a fact. And I feel like this misconception that being a meditator means you're always peaceful is so wrong. I feel like that perception is so wrong. And you could almost say it is designed to keep a person unhealthy. You're certainly not allowed to be human. You're certainly not allowed to have problems. You should be glowing all the time, right? Right? You should just be near levitation all the time, right? Good luck with that if you really want to grow. It's not the way. It's not the way. We don't manufacture suffering. We don't worship suffering. But as the Holy Spirit comes upon us and touches us, it will be stirred up in us. It will. Prayer is your remedy. Go down in there with God and notice the pain. While you're down in there with God, own it. Get past who triggered it in you. Right? Get past. The monk always told me that person was an occasion for these things to arise, but not the cause. Even when they're wrong. They're an occasion for these things to arise. They're not the cause, they're an occasion. Get down in there in prayer. Own that. Feel it. See it for what it is. It's lust, it's pride, it's anger, it's resentment, it's self-pity, it's fear, it's shame. See that. Feel it when it arises. Unhook your will from it. Find a place where you can genuinely say, I do not choose this. But don't expect it to go away. in that moment. Don't expect that. It's enough to notice the relief. When you can say, I no longer choose this, and the pain is there, but your will isn't dancing with it willingly. You're not just sticking your hand on the needles anymore. There's still some needles in you. But you're not just saying, I want it, give me more. You've stepped back. You've said, okay, I don't want this anymore, but I'm willing to experience it because it is what is. And then ask God to heal it. Give God permission to. Take your time with that process. That's a process of prayer. And then you can, after you've done something like that, you can go into meditation afterwards if you like and experience some healing there. And if you have a massive healing, you went in with a serious upheaval of shame, let's say. You did that exact process and you went into deep meditation and you came out with no shame. You must assume for certain the shame will be back. You have healed some of that shame, but there's a mountain in there and just a chunk has come out. And you got to get till it's all out. And so you must assume once you've overcome an issue for that day, you should just operate under the assumption it will return. It will. And one day you'll be delightfully surprised that it doesn't. But the contrary approach is always hurtful. People get a healing, they feel like something really did change with God, and they think to themselves, okay, I'll never do that again. And then they develop an ego personality that no longer has that issue. And then just sure as the snow is going to fall in winter, they get triggered again and it all comes up. And then they're disappointed and disheartened because they expected too much too fast. They placed all kinds of expectations on it that weren't manifest. They were just dreamed up. Okay, I hope this gives you kind of a picture of it. You know, some people are so healthy that they're going to relate to every bit of this, but it just won't be as intense. But I want you to know, you know, I'm kind of a hermit now, but for the first 10 years of my path, I was everywhere. I met so many people. I really dove into the path and spoke with so many people. I've known so many people on the journey. None of them are exempt from this work. None of them. The only kind of spirituality that doesn't involve this work is fake spirituality. Just in the playground your whole life and never doing any real work. So know that. And when it comes upon you, never think you're doing something wrong. Don't think that. Think that was already in there when I had the best day of my life last week. You know, it was the best day of my life. And on that best day, all of those pains and wounds that have come up today were lurking. If you can get that in your mind and hold it, you'll never go up and then hope you never come down again. You'll just give up on that notion. When you're up, you say, okay, I'm up now and I'll come down later. If you can accept that, it's just a nice flow. It's just a nice ride. Go up into God's love or come down into healing. Go up into God's love or come down into pruning. That's okay. There's nothing, that's perfect. That is the way. The sun comes up, the sun goes down, right? This is the way of things. It's very natural. So let that be okay. Let it be natural. Let it happen. Don't expect more from it than it is going to be. That is all a kind of pride. If you think about it, it's all a kind of pride and self-will. All these ideas about how it has to look. But I want to really help a lot of people. Well, take it easy, man. You don't even know if your job is to help people yet. You don't really know. Slow down. God's will be done. We don't know the way. We don't know the way. God knows the way. I hope this helps. I think spiritual community spiritual mentorship is a very helpful aspect to the journey. But if you could get some of these fundamental ideas in place, you will also just experience so much less suffering. Because we suffer, and then we suffer because we're suffering. And if you can get this, what I've spoken about in this video, you can at least come down to just suffering. And I think you'll find it's a lot more manageable. Suffering because we're suffering is twice as much pain. I'm suffering, and what's wrong with me because I'm suffering? I'm suffering, and I've got to do all these things to keep myself from suffering. There's a lot of other pain and stress and anxiety in those coping behaviors that we can let go of and just say, I'd like to go into a dark room alone and sit with this suffering. Or I'll sit here at my desk and close my eyes for a moment and just be with it. Just be with it. Okay, thank you for watching the videos. I want to say that I really like questions. I will answer any question I can. If I don't, it's because it's too personal. And because there's a level at which, from principles that are true for everyone to methods that are true based on those theological principles that are true for everyone, as it spreads out and gets more diverse, at some point it becomes the answer for that individual is not the answer you would give someone else. And so if questions come in that are so fine-tuned to the person, I might answer them, but I probably won't, because it's tricky there, because you would tell one person this and you would tell the other person sometimes the opposite based on where they're coming from. Okay, thank you all very much. If you look below, there's Venmo and PayPal if you want to support the channel. People have begun to support the channel, and I really want to thank you. I couldn't be more grateful, and I'm very grateful for that. And also like and subscribe if you haven't done so, and thank you all very much.